Welcome to Rethinking Youth Ministry, where each week we hope to raise the bar for youth ministry by asking questions, interviewing thinkers, and having real, honest conversations about what it looks like to lead the next generation. I'm Sarah Anderson, and sitting around the table today we have Ashley Bohens.
What's up, everyone?
Tom Chef Shunis.
How you doing?
Also known as Chef.
That is
and true. Crystal Chang.
Hi, friends.
So today on Rethinking Youth Ministry, we're going to be discussing the question, how do I get my lead pastor to, and then fill in the blank? And we feel like this is something that we hear from youth pastors a lot. It's a common kind of tension that they're feeling in their ministry. And so we just wanted to kind of talk about what that looks like, what the tensions are, and then maybe talk about some possible solutions to help youth pastors win when it comes to the relationship with their senior pastor. So, Chef, you have just left the ministry world for how many years?
Oh gosh, what was it? 12. I was at North Point for 12 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've experienced firsthand what it's like to be over a student ministry.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to represent the needs you feel like your student ministry has to someone who's above you and maybe sees a different set of needs with adult ministry.
Right.
So what were some of the common challenges that you faced?
Well, I mean, first of all, this is the most common question I get because I had a lead pastor who loved student ministry, and it was very unique. I would show videos of, Andy training my volunteers, and people would ask me, they'd say, neat video. Can I just get the intro when he talked to his leaders and how he valued his leaders to show my lead pastor? And so it was always it's always been an interesting question. And in fact, I talked to Andy directly. I'm like, Andy, this is the number one question I get. And I think the only way to get him to care is for you to say it, in some ways. And he said, no. He said, I don't know what to say because I can't understand why they don't, which I thought was a really, really strong point. Yeah. But it kind of left me with, well, what do we do with it?
Right.
But I mean, from a distance, I get that question all the time, and it's how can I get my lead pastor to? And it really usually, and I don't know what you guys think. You hear it. You talk to student ministry people all the time. It's really care in a lot of ways, whether it's budget, whether it's prioritize, whether it's they've, moved to Sunday service, which has blown up my student ministry, or they've gone multi-campus, which nobody ever goes multi-campus to reach more students, right? I mean, I haven't heard it yet.
Right, yeah. So it almost feels like there's a felt need, which is the budget, whatever that is, but then underneath all of that is the feeling that youth ministry isn't a priority to the lead pastor. Yeah. And so that kind of brings a lot of emotion.
It does bring
to the
emotion,
conversation. So what are the things, budget is something we think that they would probably be facing a lot. What are some of the other questions? What are they trying to get their lead pastor to do?
Working hours is something I just hear all the time because a lot of student pastors or youth pastors are expected to be in the office for a certain number of hours, but their students aren't available during those hours. So it's like I'm required to be in the office from 8 to 5 or 9 to 5.
Right.
And then my students get out of school at 4 o'clock and I'm expected to be at ballet recitals and football games and cheerleading competitions every night of the week. And then there's the night that we actually do student ministry. And by the way, I work on Sundays, and there's just never
and you have to
a
meet with volunteers who have a full-time job, and their only time to meet with you is in your evenings.
Exactly.
Or at 5:30 in the morning.
Right.
So yeah, that's like a big problem, the working hours. Ashley, you reached out to some student pastors, youth pastors.
As I was preparing for this podcast, I was just thinking about some of our friends, and thank you to everyone who got back to me with their thoughts. I just asked them how they would answer this question, how they would finish it, and a number of people responded. I'm just going to read a few of them here. One of the responses, which I resonate well with, is middle school ministry is just as important as high school ministry. So why do they always get the bigger salary and the bigger budget? Can you take me more seriously? I'm not just the youth guy.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting response. One of them was, give me more regular office hour time off so I can, like as Crystal said, meet with my volunteers and meet with my students. Just because I'm a female doesn't mean I can only work in children's ministry or as an admin.
Ooh, preach.
This one was so interesting to me. It was, give me another staff person. Sometimes it feels like the ministries who are drowning are the ones who get more help, and the ones who are thriving have to just keep working too hard.
That's
a really good point.
That's a great point.
That is a really good point.
I've also heard youth pastors say, I'm basically running a smaller version of the big church programming, and they have 10 staff people, but I'm doing worship and preaching and small groups and all of that with one staff person.
Yeah.
Right. And that was one of the things they said is student ministry is real ministry. Don't act like it's not.
Well, I liked how you said, I'm not just the youth person, because I think sometimes student pastors or youth pastors can be treated like a youth themselves. Like they're not taken seriously as an actual adult in adult position. And so they're just not, there's not as much respect necessarily given to them. So I think that's probably a tension that they're feeling. Crystal, did you find any other issues that you feel like?
Oh, I think there's a ton. I think I've heard a lot about the issue of funding and where funding goes and where building space goes. It seems like building space always goes to the people who can pay for building space, and that's not 15-year-olds.
Right.
And so anytime, I know even in the church where we volunteered, anytime there was a question about an adult needing more space or more room, the students were moved to a different room, which got really frustrating when we kept building sets and building stages. And then we moved 200 students to a room with a capacity of 35, which wasn't the best.
No, not ideal.
But you know what?
Sounds
Eventually we had 35 students instead of 200. Right. So that's what happened. But that's really frustrating.
Yeah.
Oh, I do have one other thing that came to mind that I feel like I've heard a few youth pastors say, and that's that there's this value placed on children's ministry because it's whatever stage of life. And this is probably an unfair criticism, by the way, but it seems like it's whatever stage of life the senior pastor's children are in. Oh. And that's where the funding goes and that's where the staffing goes because suddenly it's more important or it feels more urgent at the time.
Yeah. So I feel like with all of those kinds of problems that were being brought up, that the underlying issue is I don't feel as valued as some of the other ministries are. And would you agree that it's really a value issue? It's not, I don't feel like there's as much attention put into it. I don't feel like I'm taken as seriously as a youth worker compared to other ministries. Would you feel like that's the tension that they're feeling?
I think there's a value issue. And there's also just this issue that student pastors feel of urgency. Of I have 4 years or 3 years to accomplish something in the lives of these kids that may not feel as urgent to you if you have 20 years old until death. You have decades to accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Yeah. I feel like it's also a sense of not being understood and not feeling like that no one gets them. And so I feel like they can kind of feel compared to the children's ministry or other departments that they kind of stand alone. They're in a silo a little bit. And so that can feel very isolating.
I think there's a general, I've always felt it, I had a separate boss and I always wondered, that wasn't Andy, but I always wondered, I don't think you know what I do. I don't think you like camps, for instance. It was so interesting at camps because people would say, we had the drive conference and we have 2,000 people come into the drive conference. Well, we had 5,000 at Walk In Wisely.
Right.
And so adults would say, oh, you have like your own mini drive down there. And I'm like, mini?
More like triple.
Mini. And I have to figure out where they're staying and how they're going to get to church and who has peanut allergy.
Right.
It was like this.
And their mom calls me.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's just an interesting, it's not that they don't value you. At the end of the day, they value you and they want you to be there and they think your job's important, but it's more the feeling than anything at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I think that feeling of frustration ends up playing out not just in what you're trying to get from the lead pastor, but your interactions with him. It creates a tension, an unspoken tension between him or her that just feels like I'm not, the issue is the budget, but it's not really the budget. Like there's something else going on here, and it just kind of overflows into other areas.
Especially when you have an interaction with your lead pastor in front of other people, and it gets awkward when they don't know what you do. I remember one church that I was leaving. It was in my farewell party, and one of the pastors stood up and said, "Wait, what grades do you oversee again at my farewell?" I was like, 7th and 8th.
Right.
Thank you so much.
I feel so loved. That's good.
It's just so easy to assume motives. When someone forgets what you do or when they say no to something that you really want, it's easy to assume that I know why. And it may be that. It may be that I'm not valued, or it may just be that there are some parts to the church that I don't understand.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think it complicates it when it's an authority issue as well. You've got someone who's over you that's questioning or doesn't quite understand what you're doing. And so it feels like it's calling into question your identity a little bit because you feel belittled. And, whether that's the intention or not, a lot of times it's misunderstood, but just the feeling that can come with not being appreciated or valued.
So can I just say something that, I don't know, I'm a little hesitant to here? What about the tension of feeling like when you're going through something as a staff or you're going through something personally, like your lead pastor leading through it?
Yeah.
Have you guys ever felt that or heard that?
Yeah.
You mean like leading you as humans and not just leading programming and budgets?
Or both.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Just lead in general.
Yeah, just like lead in general, like who's driving this bus and where's this bus going?
Right.
Yeah, sometimes I think that's really important. From the personal level, I know, one of the legends around North Point is 90 days in, you get a survey because it's probably the last time you're going to see it as an outsider. And so Andy wants to know what we really think. And I wrote, I wasn't thinking about Andy at the time, but he's used it several times. I wrote, I think the church needs somebody like Jeff Henderson to lead its staff. And he took that super he didn't take it. He didn't use it against me. He's great. But I mean, that hit home.
Yeah.
But I don't think most leaders are comfortable enough to hear that from.
Right.
Well, it almost feels like as a lead pastor, there's several different hats you're required to wear. You're supposed to be a great leader, a great visionary, an executive pastor, and like handling the details, staff development. There's all these different things, and everyone expects you to be good at all of them across the board. And realistically, most pastors just aren't that.
Right.
It's just hard when your boss is your pastor.
Right.
Because you have to separate out the professional and the spiritual or not.
Right.
But it just creates this tension of
That's a really good
the
point.
person leading me and signing my paycheck is the same.
Yeah.
Well, I've talked to several different youth pastors, and we're talking about like when you're trying to go through something or get an answer to something or make progress, when you go to several different people who are in leadership and there's all these different answers and it's clear that nobody knows the answer. And it's like that tension of having to just live in that and you have no control of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Crystal, but you were saying that you feel like having your boss also be like your spiritual leader is very complicated. And when you're on staff at a church, you feel like there's only so many people you can talk to about that who would get it without ruining other people's opinions of the lead pastor as well. For as long as we've been married, either both of us or just one of us has been on staff at a church, my husband and I. And that was a tension we felt all the time. Like, what can we talk about in a small group environment? If one of us or both of us is feeling a tension at church, we can't throw the pastor under the bus when everyone else thinks everything's great.
Small
like that
group. Small group, you're constantly like, I don't want to let people into, not that it's terrible, but they just have such a high view of the church they don't
want to see under the hood.
I want them to, I want them to have a high view of the church. And so I remember the small group we're in right now, we didn't ask for it. And so we're in it and nobody else works at the church, which is the first time I've had that happen.
Yeah.
And the guy in charge at the end of introducing everybody said, "Hey, I just want to address something." He's like, Chef and Julie. Chef works at church, and Chef and Julie, the best thing we could do for our church and the best thing we could do for Chef and Julie is don't treat them like they work at the church.
That is
true. That's so nice.
It has been the best small group we've ever had. And, I've just gone through a huge transition, obviously, and left the church, and all those conversations, I got to have a small group that I could really discuss that with, which I'm not sure I would have done in a small group with staff in it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I could honor Andy and all of that. Again, I left, and it's a very unique story, I think, in church world that it went well and that we had, conversations the whole time.
And you still attend there.
Yeah. And I still sit there on Sunday, and but back to that point about like, he's your spiritual advisor. I still remember specifically, and it wasn't that long ago, sitting in church going, I've never done what Andy's asked the congregation to do this week. He's like, I'll challenge you guys to do that. I always have looked at it like, oh, that was really good. As a communicator, I'm like, thinking through all that. Yeah. And then it struck me, I am part of this flock, maybe, to speak. And I need to, I need to do that just as if I had no idea or wasn't looking at it from that perspective. So, which
can maybe make it complicated when you do have tension, because now it's a spiritual issue in addition to a professional issue.
Right.
So now it's like, do I have a problem with authority from God, or is it
Right.
Right.
just something we have to work out in the professional world? So
Right.
it gets really complicated.
Something I thought of when you were just sharing that, Chef, was I've had conversations with people who say, I wish my lead pastor was more like approachable and open to what I want for my future. Like, how many youth pastors want to make a move or want to make a job transition, or even looking for jobs, and their lead pastor doesn't know because they don't have that kind of relationship that you had with Andy or I had with my lead pastors when I wanted to make that transition.
Yeah.
And I think it's a good thing to remember because, you're probably in charge of staff right now, and you will be in charge of more staff in the future. Remember how this feels and be the boss you would want to be, be the boss you would want to have. And that's often, one of the toughest things to do because you forget, you're so busy.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's sometimes you think if I were in charge, I'd do it differently. This is how I would do it differently. But this is something we talk about in our scripts all the time to students, that you're never like autonomous. Like you're always answering to somebody, even when you're over 18 and you become lead pastor, and then you're answering to the deacons or the elders or the finance board or the denominational head. Like there's always somebody who's going to be over you. And so sometimes I think if we got out of this position, it would be different, but really it's not a positional situation. It's a personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
These are all really great questions. And I wish we had a senior pastor in the room to kind of bounce some of these ideas off of, but we've raised a lot of great issues and a lot of great tensions. So what do we do about it? What would we recommend a youth pastor begin to do, or how would we recommend they begin to talk to their senior leadership into implementing some of their ideas or making them feel more heard or understood? What would y'all suggest?
For me, one of the things I've adopted is I can't make anybody do anything.
Mm-hmm.
So in many ways, it's a bad question,
Yes.
And so what can I do? Well, I can be a better champion for my ministry. I could be more effective in how I communicate. I could work on, for me, I always ask youth pastors all the time, like, are you trusted?
Mm-hmm.
And we talked in transit about, I want to be the most trusted department in the organization when it comes to making financial decisions, when it comes to, are they going to come through with what they said they were going to do? And I talk to my staff about that all the time because I wanted to elevate, we are trusted, not to be trusted, but so we have more influence at the end of the day, to be careful what you ask for, and to, when you do ask for it boldly. That's one thing they did say. It was surprising to me. And my goodbye party is Rick, our, CFO of the whole church. He just says, I just love, Chef, that you wouldn't ask often, but when you did, you asked big.
Yeah, that's really good.
Wasn't that
Drop the
interesting?
mic.
Yeah.
What an
good.
interesting thing to say from the financial, and he gave some examples, like we did a buy one, get one for an event one time.
Oh, wow.
This is one of my favorite stories.
Whoa.
Listen up, guys. Listen up.
Well, I just went to Rick and I said, hey, we're trying to get more friends to come.
Yeah.
We're trying to get our kids to invite more friends. And, it's a $100 event. What if we, for a season or for like a week or 48 hours, just said, if you pay for a Walk in Wisely registration, you get one free. And he said, well, how bad could it be?
Worst case scenario. Best case scenario.
And then he said, no, how good could it be? He caught himself in the midst of it. I said, well, I guess, we have this many kids coming. We have this. I said, if they all did it, I guess it would be, I can't remember what it was. It was like $200,000, I said, but
I
that
think
would
you said $500,000.
was it? But it was,
The story
well,
changes.
yeah, it was.
I was there.
Right.
I know.
So it was, because it was 5,000 kids at $100
Yes.
a piece and all that stuff, right? Is that right? Or is that 50? Anyway, I'm a math teacher, right? So, but he said, well, if we I think spending $500,000 to get 5,000 kids into church that have never been here before would be some of the best money we ever spent. Now, he knew we weren't going to actually get that many, and we didn't. I can't remember. It was 200 or 300 kids that came, but it was a really big deal. And what I loved about it was, and that's a separate podcast, but the vision it casted for invest and invite and all those things. But it was a big ask. It was a direct ask, and it was, you got to make sure you say those right. And it was, it connected precisely to our vision of, getting unchurched people into church and then loving it.
I love that story so much. And I'm sure some listeners are sitting there thinking, dear Lord, I wish that we could do something like that, or I could make an ask and that would actually happen.
Yeah.
I know that's not reality for a lot of our listeners. I know that wasn't for me in some of the positions I've been in, but
But I do love the point that you weren't just asking, can we have extra money for like confetti poppers or something?
Or
it was
complaining.
Right.
I think is a really big part of it.
Yeah. You're asking for something based off the vision of the ministry. And in the ministry, the vision for the ministry was clear enough that the financial department knew about it. So it was obvious, which I think is something to be said for really clarifying your mission as a student ministry. So when you're asking these things, it's obvious to your lead pastor that this is in line with what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. I think that's right.
Well, and I think what you said about complaining is great, because somebody told me once, you can present a problem or you can present a plan.
Yeah.
And you will get so much further if you present a plan. And I think that's what you did, was this is exactly what I want and why I want it, as opposed to you guys don't give me enough budget.
Right. Or, well, high school got this and we're just coming for our share. You know, that's a terrible way to run a business, right?
Not helpful. That's good.
Or a church.
What else would y'all recommend for people, for youth pastors, as they are working to work better with their senior leadership?
Well, I learned a very important lesson early on in public education, which is actually not all that different, because I had a boss and everybody has a boss. And my boss at the time, believe it or not, was not the principal. The person who had what I wanted was the secretary. And she was allowed to choose who got substitutes and who didn't. And I can assure you, it was not me. And I couldn't understand why. And so I was sort of answering to the secretaries when I would ask for a substitute and they would say no. I was thinking, how could I get them to give me what I want? I'm actually very ill. And an older, wiser teacher kind of took me under their wing and said, here's what you need to do. You need to go visit them every day when you don't want something and just choose to be enthusiastic, cooperative, and friendly. And your attitude will get you everything you want. And I thought, that's ridiculous. That can't be true. Because every day at that point, I was running through their office, grabbing my mail and going straight to my classroom. I never said hello. And it wasn't because I didn't like them. It's just because I was in a hurry. And as it turns out, they were right. Stopping to take the time to get to know their world and what they wanted and what mattered to them eventually resulted in me getting what I wanted, just because I had a better attitude and treated them better.
That's such a good point. I had a education professor who taught us the three most powerful people in the school are not the principal or not the tenured teachers. They're the principal's assistant, the lunch lady or the head lunch person, and the custodian. And
super true.
And they just said, just invest in them, know their names, and that's what you should do anyway.
Right.
However, they're exactly right. The most powerful people in the church are not necessarily, they're the people who control the space and time of the most powerful people in church. So it's a really great point.
You're saying about paying attention to these secretaries because they want to feel seen and appreciated and heard are the same things that ultimately our youth pastors are wanting from their senior leadership. But I don't think we're necessarily thinking that the senior leadership is wanting it as well. So we're feeling frustrated because we're not feeling appreciated or known, but are we putting that same effort into knowing them and the pressures that they're living with in day-to-day life and in the ministries that they're trying to lead as well? I remember one of the best pieces of advice we got when we first got married was when it came to arguing, was to treat the marriage like it was a separate entity. And so when it came down to winning a fight, it wasn't about a person winning, but like what was the best for the marriage. And so I think when it comes to talking to youth pastors and senior pastors, that a lot of times it's my request versus this request. But if we can start to change the conversation to be around what's the best thing for our church as a whole, and not just our youth ministry separately or our adult ministry separately, but how can we align our visions and help our church as a whole win? It kind of changes the conversation a little bit as well.
I had a thought about the tension we talked about where we wanted lead pastors maybe to notice what the youth pastors were doing and how they were winning. Well, because we can't control them and we can't control what they notice or when they pop in, I think just focusing on making a pocket of greatness where you are, because you don't have to wave a flag and say, look how good I'm doing when you're doing well. Because it's just going to bubble up to the surface and everybody's going to notice anyways.
That's a good point. And there's an advantage to not being the focus, and sometimes, sometimes it's the greatest gift that nobody's, I always said, it's like, I feel as the middle school pastor, I'm a little bit like the cheerleading coach when I was a principal at school. As long as nobody's complaining and things are moving along fine, like I didn't think about it. And so if nobody's coming around to say, why are you doing that? What exactly are you doing? You can try things, and things that work, you can elevate. Things that don't work, you just kind of keep moving on. And that's a really good thing. Another point I was thinking about is just your approach. Kind of your marriage comment made me think like that. Like, there is not one lead pastor in the country who would sit around and go, well, it's just not important to me.
Right.
Yeah.
That's just, it's the same thing. It's our same attitude towards parents as we think, why don't they care? Well, every parent wants their kid, and so we've just got to approach it differently. And so, which changes the way you start the conversation, which, if you're imagining he chose this over this, or she chose this over this, you're putting yourself in a bad spot, and you should approach it differently. You've got to realize looking down the mountain in an organization is very different than where we are looking up the mountain. Like when you're looking down the mountain, you don't see who's taking cover. When you're looking up the mountain, you do see who's taking cover. And you understand those parts of the organization, and that's just a blind spot.
Right.
Because they're at the top of the organization looking down. So a lot of times you can be really helpful. Yeah. So if you approach it from, I always was told, like, if you go in confronting, good luck with that.
Right.
But start with curiosity.
Yes.
Move to concern, like, well, and then, if that doesn't work, you move to a direct confrontation. But usually you don't have to get there.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's an educational, moment for a leader.
But all of us tend to start with the confrontation in any relationship.
Yeah.
Well, it's because I usually have had the confrontation in my mind.
Well, it's
already
what
before the
motivates
meeting
us to walk in
happens.
that office, right?
I've already won the fight before I left the house.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along those same lines, I read in a book one time that it said when blame is the goal, understanding is the casualty. So when you go into a conversation, like, I need to point out everything that you've done wrong, then there is no chance that you're going to get everybody on the same page by the time you leave. But if you're going in with the goal of trying to have an understanding of where they're coming from, then you're a lot more likely to at least come out.
It's like a Dale Carnegie thing or something, isn't
Yeah,
it?
right?
Yeah,
How to
that's
win,
right.
win friends and influence
That's
people.
exactly right.
Just buy that book.
One of the other things that I learned that I wish I could take credit for, actually, Ben Crawshaw told me this, and I'm pretty sure he stole it from someone else, and that's that public loyalty brings private influence. And so if you can be loyal to the senior pastor and publicly be positive and enthusiastic and supporting of his plans, it will buy you the opportunity and the influence when you're behind closed doors to really ask some hard questions. But if you're criticizing publicly, or even sort of indirectly publicly, like awkward side conversations where you might mention it verbally or with facial expressions, which I would tend to do. Passive aggressive facial expressions. You might not have the influence when you really need it to have that tough conversation.
I think this has something to do with what we're talking about. It was, we just discovered it actually with Lead Small. And Lead Small is a book that's really a job description for small group leaders. We didn't feel like there was a good one out there, or there was one at all. So we wrote one. And it's gone really well. People seem to love it. But what we found is youth pastors would grab it because it's a felt need. Like, that's great. I'm so tired of sitting at coffee and trying to explain what a small group leader is. I just want to explain it without using the word like a coach, like a friend, like a parent, but not, And this is a small group leader. And so it worked great. But what happened was when the volunteers got the vision for it, they started making demands of the ministry, like, I need you to set me up better here. And then that started bubbling up to the lead pastor, and the lead pastor started to react. And so it was almost like
that volunteer.
It's been working. I'm not saying it should be. I mean, it could be a strategy for you that it's really, at the end of the day, if your parishioners or however, the members of your church are complaining about the same things over and over again, or asking for something, that's something the lead pastor hears, And
they're the ones tithing.
They're tuned into that, right? So sometimes we have to grab them by the face and say, I need you to tune in here for a while. They're always tuned into those sort of requests. And so it's just been an interesting thing.
Yeah.
And that's a great reason to partner with parents. Because if they love your ministry, they'll be vocal to the senior pastor, who will also love your ministry.
That's true.
Point.
I remember when I was leaving one of my church jobs, I had a great relationship with the lead pastor, but I didn't know if he fully knew necessarily all that I had done in the years that I was there, like what I had invested my time in. And I was at the middle school ministry conference, which all you middle school people out there, I hope to see you there. And they do this thing there where they contact the lead pastors of the people who are attending the conference.
I remember this.
Yes, you were sitting next to me, Chef.
Okay.
Actually, I was leaving that job to come work for Chef.
Nice.
I'm sitting next to him, and the host comes on the stage and they say my name. They're like, Ashley Bohan, stand up. So in front of the middle school camp friends, I stand up and all eyes are on me because we're in the front row because we're over at Jeevers. And
I think you drug me to the front row.
okay, yeah, that's true. So they read a letter from my lead pastor encouraging me in front of the entire camp friends.
No way.
Like and like all eyes are on me and I'm
How
like,
many
so,
tears did you
my
cry?
word.
I was so shocked. Like I didn't know that he thought those things. I didn't even know that he noticed those things. So like that was so affirming to me.
Yeah.
So for any listeners out there who feel like, I don't even know if they care, I don't even know if they notice, like I hope you take that as encouragement. They probably notice more than you realize they notice. And then I sat down and Chef leans over and goes, was that your, what did you say? Was that your recommendation letter?
Very effective.
I know. It's like I set that up.
That's how far I'm willing to go to get to work for you. That's awesome.
That's funny.
He goes, I don't remember that I said that. I'm funny.
Well, I've loved this conversation, and I feel like we've landed on lots of different things for people to try. But I think that maybe the most encouraging thing about it is that we've shared a lot of stories, and I think it gives a sense that people are in this together and that nobody is feeling this tension with their leadership alone. So I love that. I feel like this is really encouraging in that regard. So Ashley, if you had to come up with one piece of advice or encouragement or just one takeaway you would want a youth pastor to have as they are going back to their senior leadership and wanting to accomplish something or get something from them, what would you have them do?
Two things come to mind. The first thing would be figure out what it is in you that you're looking for. So for me personally, that was go to counseling and figure out what I was searching for and where I was trying to find my confidence.
Yeah.
And the second thing that helped me the most as I navigated these kind of situations was having a mentor or somebody further down the road. I mean, Chef
good.
was that for me.
Yeah.
Scott Rubin was that for me. Katie was that for me. Heather, and people who were further down the road out of my context who could help me think about it clearly and who weren't emotionally invested in that specific situation or that student or that pastor.
That's awesome. I really love
I
that.
think that's great.
Chef, what would
I get
you
to go
say?
next?
Yes.
I think, a couple things. One is be what you're hoping you get from your boss to somebody.
Yeah.
I just think that's just a very practical way we do it. Plant seeds of leadership in the young leaders and, never assume they know they're awesome at something. Right?
Right?
That's true with children.
Right.
That's true with just be encouraging to each other, and it's one of the greatest ways to influence somebody. Not that you're doing it so that you can, make a request later, but you're doing it because you truly see it, and we're just trying to be authentic with each other. And then these are conversations you should prep for. These are things you never want to do them in anger. And for me, and everybody's a bit different, I have to write down the sentence that I need to say before I end the meeting. So, and often I start with the old "I feel when you because" sort of stuff, which is just a great tool. It usually changes from that point, but that's where I have to start. And then I get the sentence of, I just need to make sure to say this to feel like I've communicated clearly. And again, and then check yourself. Am I using comparison as part of my argument?
Right.
Bad idea. It's vision. Does it align with what the church, really wants to do? And you can explain it from that context. Never make up stats. Never exaggerate. Be.
I can't believe that's a thing you have
It
to
is
say.
a thing.
Right?
It is a thing. We exaggerate all the time because we're trying to make our case.
Right, to make a point.
And then that just leads to you not being trusted. So,
Right.
I learned early on to start. I also learned not to make stuff up, especially in the North Point culture. Like, if you try to make something up, you get cornered quick. You're like, well, I just kind of feel like, and I'm okay. You feel, but you have no. That's neat. You feel that way.
Science teacher.
Right. Just have some. Just don't exaggerate. Say the way it is. And
But
why
I do
you
love
wanna
that
do
point that don't treat that conversation with your pastor as a chance to emotionally process in the moment.
gosh.
Like think through it ahead of time so that when you come in, you've got your one sentence you want to make sure you
Right.
land on.
Go to
But
counseling.
Go to counseling. That's your takeaway. That-
Delivery matters.
Go
I
to
think that's what
counseling.
you're saying. Is
Well, I think so too. And counseling helps with delivery. I think
you for the
everybody should be in
affirmation.
counseling, but that, that's me.
And Crystal, what would you say?
I would say on the next episode we'll all bring our counselors to
I
the
know what
table.
you're going to say.
No, I would agree that delivery matters. The words you use when you approach someone will define whether you're allies or enemies. And you need to set yourself up as an ally from the very beginning of the conversation. And there's a book called Make Believe, and I have to own the fact that I'm a little bit biased about it. I helped edit this book, so sorry, totally biased conversation. But Ben Crawshaw wrote a book called Make Believe, and it's 5 things great student pastors choose to believe, whether they're true in the moment or not. And one of the chapters is your senior pastor is right. And if you can choose to believe that in the moment, it will shape the way that you have that conversation. Even if he's not actually right or she's not actually right, it'll change your approach. And I thought that was so helpful.
Yeah, that's really good. And also a new book just came out by Clay Scroggins called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And I think it kind of addresses these same ideas as well. But I have read the book and I'm not biased. And it was a great book. So read Make Believe. It was a great book. So I feel like kind of what we landed on is it really isn't about getting your pastor to do anything at all, really. I mean, I think
because
what everybody, you can't. I think where
bad question
we've landed, it's a terrible question, and it's actually more about you, like more of a self-reflection and what you're able to do, and then how can you bring your best self to your senior pastor and encourage that relationship the best way. Thanks for joining us for the Rethinking Youth Ministry podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love you to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes and leave a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. Your review is going to help make this podcast better. And finally, for more resources, to check out the show notes for this episode and to learn more about the student curriculum and strategy we're all a part of at Orange, visit our website, rethinkingym.org.